The San Antonio Spurs are unsure if Gregg Popovich will be able to coach next season. And we've heard multiple sources now say the same thing. I want to hear your opinion. What do you guys expect? As I think if he comes back, then let him. But that's definitely not something to rush after having a stroke. And the more details we hear about it, it seems I've never had anybody in my family have a stroke. Thankfully, obviously, strokes are common for someone of his age. And that's not a small thing, again, for someone his age. Hell, they aren't that light on people who are young in their 50s, 40s that have strokes. He was 76. So I think it would be nice for him to come back, even if it's just a sort of, yeah, made it, and maybe give him like last game to coach and transition him into a full-time front office role, as he is already in a front office role. He's the team's not defunct, but I guess you would say general manager, and he works hand in hand with R.C. Buford to run the team, who's the president and CEO. I really do want them to do something that's, instead of stroke, medical emergency, time off, career over. He deserves better. But multiple people have made it clear in reportings that Mitch Johnson, if they do have to bring another coach in, or Gregg Popovich is going to be around, may or may not be the interim head coach after this season. I told you guys he was the youngest one on staff. Brett Brown is on staff, and he didn't even get consideration. I don't know if that's because he doesn't want it or they didn't want to give it to him. I believe they wanted to see what they had in Mitch. Nothing wrong with Mitch. He's just running the same stuff Gregg did. But he lacks the in-game adjustments or the creativity to have made anything stand out differently. I think certain players like Steph Castle has definitely grown. So, and other people, but how much on that is Mitch, or is that just the Spurs culture? And James Borrego is a former head coach for the Hornets and a former assistant for the Spurs, who's somebody that they could go after. Before we continue, hit that like and subscribe button. Comment down below, what do you guys think? As ESPN reports, Gregg Popovich has made significant progress since suffering a stroke in November and is ahead of schedule in his recovery. But ESPN is reporting that no one within the San Antonio Spurs knows yet whether he'll be able to return to the sidelines next season. The 76-year-old, and the physical demand of being a head coach is already immense. And he has spent the time recovering after spending several weeks in the hospital. And they said it took him a few months after the stroke to start walking again. Subliminally saying that the stroke left him immobile for a period of time. T's and P's to his family. I really hope that he's out there again soon. This article did confirm something that we had talked about in the past and that had been reported for a little bit, that Steve Kerr was widely linked in league circles as the possible successor to Gregg Popovich as the head coach of the San Antonio Spurs. Now, since the extension he had signed this past offseason for 2 more seasons, he'll remain with the franchise as long as Steph Curry's continue to play. And I don't know if it's going to happen anymore, to be honest. I think that ship has sailed. In the same article, they mentioned Brook Lopez saying that Mitch Johnson has the highest basketball IQ ever seen. And personally, Johnson played collegiate basketball at Stanford, came up the Spurs system. He has a good reputation amongst coaching circles and interviewed for the job. Brook Lopez basically said he's the highest basketball IQ person he's ever been around, called him a maestro, and ironically, I think that's all nice and dandy. I don't want to be like pessimistic, but I just feel like that was kind of like a fluff piece right there. Miss Johnson's kind of been getting like hit and like criticized by people, and a lot of people have not been fair to him. However, I don't think his camp, his agents, the Spurs, like that. So they probably asked ESPN, could you write some nice things about Mitch? Now, I do find the whole ordeal to be one that, how is this going to be something that's going to affect the rest of their season or the outlook? No, because I think the Spurs are a well-run organization and they probably have an idea of a plan. Now, I think when you look at this, I think it's definitely interesting because the timing. We're a month away from the playoffs and coaching searches are going to begin. The NBA is not like the NFL, where coaches are usually fired mid-season and replaced pretty quickly, or they're fired in the offseason, either abruptly or we knew the writing was on the wall, depending on the season or the playoff exit. Now, the way that coaches search happens is a little bit different, but again, easier to read. Usually you can see the executives, but it's hard with San Antonio. They've never done this basically since Gregg's been there. And now the big problem with looking even at the Spurs coaching tree with assistants, Jane Borrego and Becky Hammonds are like the youngest ones that are available, as a lot have either become coaches or are just old. Like Coach Bud, Mike Budenholzer, could become available if the Suns fire another coach. Even Monty Williams is available. They're both 60-year-olds. The other thing, I think the biggest, is the more I think about it, Will Hardy, before he was with Boston, he was with San Antonio. And for a while, I always thought Will Hardy was the guy. So, unless it's a former player or somebody that we don't even know, because it's just, the best thing to say is to expect the unexpected, especially with this organization. I want to hear your guys' opinion. Now, if we want to go another route, there is the G League. They have the Austin Spurs. Since 2001, they've had 10 head coaches. And their current head coach, Scott King, was named head coach this season. He had been with the Knicks. And before that, he had been with the Mad Ants and the Pacers, Pistons. So he's somebody to consider. However, before him, it was Will Voigt, who's now the lead assistant at BYU with Kevin Young. And that might be a gig that he likes and is cool with it. You know, I don't know what to say. Also, by the way, Will Voigt, mom is like a world-renowned poet. Now, Petar Bozic is the head coach of the London Lions. I don't know if he's somebody, they're also redone that league, so he's probably making bank. Matt Nielsen was a former G League head coach. He's currently an assistant coach for the Spurs. Australian bloke. He's possibly somebody that I think, as a former player overseas and has been with the Spurs for 6 years after being with Perth Wildcats, champion all the way through. That, I think Matt Nielsen's definitely one to consider off of that. Obviously, Taylor Jenkins and Quinn Snyder are both with teams that I don't think are going to be available. Ken McDonald, Director of Student Athlete Development, Better Life Balance, plus he's 55 years old. Brad Jones, he's like 56. He was with the Grizzlies until 2 years ago and says nothing. And then there was Dennis Johnson, who's dead for the last 17 years, 18 years, rest in peace. And Jeff Malone, who's 63 and seemingly has been retired from the basketball life for 20 odd years. There's also the late nephew of Vivian Malone Jones, who was the first African-American graduate of the University of Alabama and the wife of U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. So, a little bit.